Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Gwen, and today I thought I would do a recommendations list. This list is themed on Black History Month here in the United States, so all of the books will be written by Black American authors. I have read all of these books, but at the end of the video, I'm also going to let you know what is on my TBR, because I also have a list of books I'm very excited to get to by Black authors this year, hopefully. I'm going to start the list with some classics. I think these are recommended a lot because they're so good and because historically they have profound significance outside of the book alone, whether that be about the author's life or what happened after said book was published. The first book is The Color Purple by Alice Walker. This is a very notable classic book, and it's a very hard read. We are following a woman named Celie when she is very young all the way up to the end of her life, and how she started in poverty and the abuse she went through as a child throughout her adolescence and into adulthood, and then the freedom she starts to find when she makes a new friend. My memory of reading this book was, I remember being very surprised by the first page because I didn't realize we were going to jump into so much right at the start. So I would recommend reading the warnings for this book before fully diving in, because I do think you need to be in a certain headspace, or maybe it's just not for you at all at this time. But I do think it's a really good read. I think it's an important read, and I did have a good time overall. Like, I really enjoyed the story and what ended up happening. And I was surprised also that there was some queerness showcased in the book. So I thought that was really great as well. The next book I would recommend is Their Eyes Are Watching God by Zora and Neal Hurston. I just recently read this book back in October, and I was surprised on how simple the story was and then how complex, because at the end of the edition I had, there were essays explaining why this book was so important. And even though it doesn't seem like a big to-do now, the fact that a Black woman was able to have her own life by the end in her adulthood was astounding and not something normal at all at the time period that this book was written in. It's a story about a Black woman who we meet, I believe, around like age 15, I want to say. She's being raised by her grandmother, and she is going to then be married off to a farm owner in the same area because at least he has wealth, even though he's been married before. And when she is then married for a year with him, she's pretty bored and finds a different man who is walking down the dirt road, and he instead takes her away, and they get married and have a life that is very controlled by him. Basically, in her second marriage, she is finding out that she's losing herself and she wants to find herself again. So the book is really about going away from shame in your life and just experiencing life as you want to be as a Black woman. Very profound, very good writing, and I understand the impact of that book now. The next book I want to recommend is actually more of an author, which is James Baldwin. I have read both Giovanni's Room and If Beale Street Could Talk. Both of them are phenomenal. Baldwin's writing is something that is hard to describe until you read it. The way that I have told people is that it's like butter that is warmed up, and once it hits the pan or it hits the bread, it just smoothly glides over the surface and nothing is wrong with it. It just looks and smells and tastes fabulous. That is Baldwin's writing. Giovanni's Room is following a relationship between a man and another man in, I believe, Italy, definitely in Europe. It's a man who is actually married who finds this other man. They're having a relationship, and he has to decide whether he stays with this man in Europe or he goes back to his wife in America. The other book, If Beale Street Could Talk, is following a young African-American couple in New York City in the 1970s who recently were living together and starting a family, but unfortunately the man in the relationship gets racially profiled by the police and is now in jail. Tish, our narrator, is trying to figure out her life after this, trying to see if she can get Fonnie out while getting help from both of their families. It's a book about identity and shame and race in the United States. It's a short book, but I was very impacted by the story. The only thing I will say is it did wrap up fairly quickly, and I wish it had a few more pages at the end, like maybe 30-ish pages more, but it was still a good read. Anything by Baldwin, I would always recommend. If you haven't already, you should read his works. Okay, so that's it for the classic section. I'm now going to do my other short section, which is a nonfiction, literary fiction, essays, and a poetry book. I didn't know how to wrap that all up together, so this is the easiest I can do. The first one I'm going to start with is a more recent book, which is The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennet. This book I remember reading and being so astounded by. I know there's a classic book. It's called Passing. I forget who the author is, but I know that that is a very similar story to The Vanishing Half. In The Vanishing Half, we're following two sisters who grew up in a small town in the South. Though they are twins, they have different colored skin. One is lighter than the other. So this story focuses on the colorism that both of these girls get affected by and how one thrives later on in her life and the other one doesn't. It's a very, very good read, very impactful. Highly recommend. When I was collecting all the books around my room, I realized I forgot one because I had read it back in high school. The poetry book is called Magnolia by A. Van Jordan. I remember adoring this book, and every once in a while I'll pick it up just to read a couple of poems. But here is the story that is within the book. In 1936, Magnolia Cox became the first African American to reach the final round of the National Spelling Bee competition. The Southern judges, it is thought, kept her from winning by presenting a word not on the official list. Though she had been an A student and dreamed of being a doctor, Magnolia left school, married, and worked as a domestic in the home of a physician. Magnolia is a prominent commentary on one life and on the social and racial attitudes of the Depression 30s. So I think this book speaks for itself, and I think you should definitely pick it up. The next book I would suggest is the essay one, which is called Thick and Other Essays by Tressie McMillon Cottom. This is a fantastic read. Cottom's work is just fun and lively, and she's also very poignant on what she wants to talk about in each of these essays. I remember the first time around I read them, I was really surprised by all of the information about the academia setting. She also talks about race, gender, and pop culture in these essays. It's a really good read, and I'd highly recommend journaling after each essay your thoughts, because this will make you think a lot. The one nonfiction book I would recommend is Hood Feminism by Mikki Kendall. This is a fun read. It's one of those nonfiction books that you're like, this is nonfiction? Kendall writes about her life in Chicago when she was growing up, along with being a single parent with two kids, and how different aspects of her life were affected by racism and why feminism was not working for her as a Black woman in America. She talks about almost every topic you can think of. I do think this book is a starting point, and you should continue reading and being informed after reading this book. Okay, the one sci-fi I've read, because for a while in my life I did not read a lot of sci-fi, my apologies, I should have been reading it sooner, is The Unkindness of Ghosts by River Solomon. This one I really enjoyed, though I felt like the ending needed more oomph. But what I remember about the story the most is our character is autistic, and there's a lot that goes on with that and how they interpret their world as they're going through the spacecraft. And they also have a queer relationship with someone on the spaceship. River Solomon is one of those writers that you don't know what you're going to get by the end of the book, but it's going to be a fun ride every time. I really enjoy reading their stuff. The other book that I read by River Solomon was The Deep. So this book I remember being super impactful and really, really enjoying it, but I am going to read part of the summary because I can't remember all of the details, and I want to make sure I give you an accurate description of the book. The water-breathing descendants of African slave women tossed overboard have built their own underwater society and must reclaim the memories of their past to shape their future in this brilliantly imaginative novella. So this book is considered speculative fiction, but it's still categorized under fantasy. And I just remember the fear and the sadness and the intensity of those memories and of the one person who has to store all of them, because not all of them remember their history. It's one specific person that's gifted it, and that's the character you're following in The Deep. Really, really great story. Highly recommend. Okay, now I'm going to get into my two biggest genres, which is fantasy and horror. Let's start with fantasy first. I think it's very easy because I think this one is recommended all the time, but there's a reason why this series is always recommended, and that's the Broken Earth Trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. I remember reading this trilogy the first time and just being so overwhelmed with how good it was. You are following a woman who's in her 40s who is trying to find her kidnapped daughter, but she's also keeping the secret that she has powers. This world is considered a dystopian, and sometimes this series is considered sci-fi, not fantasy, and sometimes it's fantasy, not sci-fi. So if you are an avid reader of sci-fi and or fantasy, I would highly recommend this trilogy. It's a really good time. My next recommendation is a duology, which is written by Ashante Williams, and that is The Sorcerer of the Wildeeps and A Taste of Honey. This is following two male characters who are slowly falling in love with each other. I can't recommend these two enough. I actually don't hear a lot of people talking about this anymore. I remember when A Taste of Honey was being talked about a lot more a few years ago, but I actually prefer the first book because I liked the ending more than I did with the second one. This is a fantasy about romance, and the other thing I will mention is it's not for everyone, the writing. It's very much towards poetry writing, especially in the first book. The second one is a little bit easier to understand what's going on, but the first one has a lot more surrealism quality, and that's what I really, really loved about it, is how much it was your interpretation sometimes of the words being used while there was still a plot going on. What I did like about the second book, A Taste of Honey, was that we got more lore of the world. We got a more expansive look at the world, and I really, really enjoyed that. I just didn't like the ending of the second book. So yeah, if you need an MLM romance that just tugs on your heartstrings, I'd recommend this duology. This is another book where I thought it was in one category, but it's also recommended for another genre, so we're just going to use this as our transition point, and that is going to be The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. The story is following a young woman in a small town who is starting to realize that her powers are coming forth as a witch, and she doesn't know how to handle them or what to do, and also it's the reaction of the town learning that something strange is coming to them. This is a very haunting tale. It is definitely horror, and I would check triggers because there's one scene that I do believe some people would not be able to read or would be very traumatized by. This was a fantastic read, and I'm actually excited that there might be another book after this one, though I believe Henderson has said she's pausing on writing it currently, but I can't wait if there is a second book in this world. My next recommendation for horror is When the Reckoning Comes by LaTanya McQueen. This was such a fun time, and I wish more people would talk about it because it's so good. It follows a woman who has gotten an invitation from a former friend / acquaintance to go to her wedding that is on a plantation that is in their old hometown. On the way there, we get flashes of what happened during her time in that town as she grew up and the reason why she is scared of this plantation. So throughout the story, three friends are trying to figure out the history between themselves and also this plantation. It's a really great time, scary time, but very, very good. This is probably my top tier book of horror. I can't stop thinking about it. I can't stop recommending the book. It is just such a good time, and it is Ring Shout by P. Djèlí Clark. I cannot tell you how well this is written and how well it finishes the story up too. It's a perfect little horror book, and I hope and pray that Clark writes more in this world. Ring Shout is a historical horror novella that starts in 1912 in Georgia, and you're following three black women following a Ku Klux Klan group and trying to coax out the demons that are in this group. It goes from there. It's a wild time, and one of my favorite things about this story is how much folklore, Southern folklore, is added in. Again, this is why I hope Clark writes more. I want more folk tales in horror. If you've not read this already, I highly recommend you should. Another horror book I would recommend is The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. This was a fantastic time. I actually read it as an audiobook recently, and the performance of the narrator was phenomenal. All the voices she did was great, and I thought originally this book was way too long for what it was. I was like, this is almost 21 hours long. What? But the story is stunning. It's so good. You are following two siblings, Gloria and Robert, on their way to school in the morning. Robert unfortunately does something that lands him in the reformatory. Gloria then is going out of her way to try to rescue her 12-year-old brother from this place, and Robert is trying to survive the horrors of the reformatory. This is a story based on a relative of Due's, but it's not exactly the story that happened. This is a historical horror novel, so it's focusing on race, classism, and the complexities of identity. There is a lot in here, and at first I thought the story was a little bit too on the nose, but as you read from both perspectives, you need all of that dialogue. You need all of that information and inner thoughts from both of these children because, my God, you are just rooting for them the entire time. And again, with most horror written by Black authors, especially if it's historical fiction, the horror is usually what their Black characters face. It is not necessarily the subgenre of horror that's in the book. I would recommend looking up trigger warnings because there is a lot that happens at the reformatory, so always consider doing doing that when reading horror. My last recommendation is When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. This was a fantastic read. This focuses on a young woman who lives in New York. Her street specifically is going through gentrification and how scary it is and how unsettled she is by it and what she's also dealing with personally. It was a great representation of how people feel when gentrification hits their neighborhood. I would say, even though this is supposed to be thriller, there is a horror element to it by the end. I was on my toes the entire time for this book. It was fantastic. It was fast paced. And I think the story is very impactful for anyone who reads it. So those are my recommendations. And that's a lot. And I have more recommendations to add to your TBR because these books are on my TBR and I can't wait to get to them later this year. Okay, so for the books on my TBR, I'm going to be reading off of my phone because I would like to give an accurate summary for all of these books. So the first book is Dominion by Addie E. Sitchins. I hope I'm pronouncing the last name correctly. This is a lit-fic contemporary book. In this taut Southern family drama, the sins of a favorite son rock a small Mississippi town. Reverend Sabre Winfrey, shepherd of Seven Seals Baptist Church, believes in God, his own privilege, and enterprise. Besides the barbershop and radio station he owns, he has an iron hand on every aspect of Dominion, Mississippi society. He and his wife Priscilla have 5 boys. The youngest, Emmanuel, is called Wonder Boy. No one sings prettier, runs as fast, or turns as many heads. After a surprising encounter with a stranger, Wonder Boy finds himself confronted by questions he'd never imagined, and his response will send shockwaves through the entire community. Totally up my alley. Can't wait to read this one. The next book is The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor Lavalle, sorry. This is a historical fantasy horror. People move to New York looking for magic and nothing will convince them it isn't there. Charles Thomas Tester hustles to put food on the table, keep the roof over his father's head from Harlem to Flushing Meadows to Red Hook. He knows what magic a suit can cast, the invisibility a guitar case can provide, and the curse written on his skin that attracts the eye of wealthy white folks and their cops. But when he delivers an occult tome to a reclusive sorceress in the heart of Queens, Tom opens a door to a deeper realm of magic and earns the attention of things best left sleeping. It reminds me a lot of Ring Shout, and I'm hoping it's just as good. The next book on my list is Burn Down Master's House by Clay Kane. This is another historical literary fiction novel. I believe this one is coming out this year. In the midst of the Civil War, another war brews among the enslaved who are living and enduring in the shadow of the plantations, imposing monuments to power and tyranny. Their interconnected journeys of rebellion and kinship unite them in a long, seething need for justice. In an ultimate act of revolution, they will get it. Yep, I'm definitely going to enjoy a rebellion story. The next books on my TBR is a novella series written by Moses Ose Utomi, and that is The Forever Desert. The first book is The Lies of the Ajungo. I've heard really great things about this. A lot of people who like similar fantasy books as me have recommended this so much. It follows one boy's epic quest to bring water back to his city and save his mother's life, prepared to enter the Forever Desert. So yeah, each of these is, I guess, focused on one journey of one character, but in the same location. I am very excited to read these 3 when I do. And I don't know how many are supposed to be in this series, but there are currently 3 novellas out. The next book on my TBR is The Lesson by Cadwell Turnbull. This is a science fiction book. An alien ship rests over Water Island. For 5 years, the people of the U.S. Virgin Islands have lived with the Yana, a race of super advanced aliens on a research mission they will not fully disclose. They are benevolent in many ways, but meet any act of aggression with disproportional wrath. This has led to a strange relationship between the Yana and the local Virgin Islanders, and a peace that cannot last. A year after the death of a young boy at the hands of an Yana, 3 families find themselves at the center of the inevitable conflict, witnesses and victims to events that will touch everyone and teach a terrible lesson. My goal this year in general is to read a lot more sci-fi, so I'm very excited to pick up this book when I do. Okay, this one I know a lot of people have read, which is why it's now on my TBR, and that is Change Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Ajay Brenya. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. This book is a dystopian novel. The story is about 2 top women gladiators fighting for their freedom within a depraved private prison system not so far removed from America's own. This one, if I remember correctly, is it's a reality TV show that is people fighting in the prison. Wild. But honestly, this could definitely happen in the real world now, and that's very depressing. Terrifying, actually. Next book on my TBR is The Scourge Between Stars by Ness Brown. This is a horror science fiction novel. As acting captain of the starship Calypso, Jacqueline Albright is responsible for keeping the last of humanity alive as they limp back to Earth from their forebears' failed colony on a distant planet. Faced with constant threats of starvation and destruction in the treacherous minefield of interstellar space, Jacqueline's crew has reached their breaking point. As unrest begins to spread throughout the ship's wards, a new threat emerges, picking off crew members in grim, bloody fashion. This sounds so much like Alien, and I love Alien, so I'm very excited to pick up this book when I do. Sci-fi horror is probably one of my favorite mesh genres because I am terrified of space. Speaking of which, the last book on my TBR is another sci-fi horror and by Rivers Solomon, which is Sorrowland. Vern, 7 months pregnant and desperate to escape the strict religious compound where she was raised, flees for the shelter of the woods. There she gives birth to twins and plans to raise them far from the influence of the outside world. But even in the forest, Vern is a hunted woman. Forced to fight back against the community that refuses to let her go, she unleashes incredible brutality far beyond what a person should be capable of, her body racked by inexplicable and uncanny changes. I don't want to keep on reading because usually with horror I want to be surprised by what happens. But yes, I'm going to be reading another Rivers Solomon book and I'm very excited when I do. Okay, we're almost done. I do have 2 other books that I do want to recommend that I remembered being on my TBR, and one of these books I'm already reading for the month of February, and that is The Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. If you thought a big name was missing from this list, it would be hers, so I can't wait to pick this up and read it. I know a couple of friends have recently read this and they were very moved and profoundly changed by it. I know it's going to be a hard read, but I can't wait to begin this. And the other book, which was found by my mother because I really love folklore stories, and this one is by Zora Neal Hurston. It is The Mules and Mend. This is a collection of folklore that she collected in the South, and I can't wait to read this when I do. And that, my friends, is my recommendations list plus TBR. I hope you found some books that were interesting and intriguing and you will add them to your TBR and read them very soon. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.